Welcome back. The relationship between North Korea and Japan is practically non-existent. There are a lot of things that are happening in North Korea that influence and affect Japan. And in the last week on the shores of Yamaguchi, a defector washed up on the shores, Michael.
Yeah, it's kind of a strange, weird way that he did. He was supposedly clutching basically a float, and he was found floating off the shore of Yamaguchi Prefecture, which is all the way to the west and is in fact the home prefecture of the Prime Minister, though he represents the other side of that prefecture. This is not a story that generally happens. It's because it's actually quite hard for North Korean defectors to come across the Sea of Japan, which the Koreans call the East Sea. That route is actually not the one that's normally taken. Normally they cross the land border to the north. So this is actually quite a rare occurrence, but we have had things washing up on the shores of the Sea of Japan, mostly boats full of skeletons.
We talked about that a couple of episodes ago.
That's right, and that was creeping people out. This time we have a live person, and it's a young person who claims he was on a ship and jumped off it with this float, and it's a little bit of a bizarre story, and people are checking it out.
Right. Apparently it wasn't a ship. I initially thought it was a ship too, because as a stowaway or maybe even as a deckhand, you could pick something up and jump off the ship. Very dangerous to do. Most people who do that actually drown. But according to his story, he was on a wooden skiff, like one of the ones that we found on the shores earlier.
It's possible, but the thing is, there's a real disconnect between the way that North Korea is dealing with the world and Japan in particular, and these defectors that arrive, or these skeleton ships. Because at the same time, this week we had the firing of the missiles again into the Sea of Japan. These tests.
What was it? 3 of them?
3 missiles of various sizes and various distances. Again, North Korea is in violation of UN rules, and so it'll be brought to the Security Council in terms of new sanctions. It's a never-ending story. So we have missiles, examples of high technology, and then these individuals who come with the shirts on their backs and clutching a small floating device to come here. It's a real contrast, and it's hard to understand what the whole purpose of it is.
His crime, are you familiar with his crime?
I'm not familiar with his crime. Tell me.
He was caught watching a video that was filmed in South Korea. One of these dramas.
Yes. That of course is a big problem in North Korea, because, gosh, their own homegrown dramas just don't bring in the folks.
No, you've seen the satellite images of North Korea and South Korea at night, where the lights are really vibrant in the south, and in the north
they're saving energy.
Yes.
they're the planet's finest at saving energy. Yeah, the thing is, we have a long history here in Japan of these interactions between the North and Japan, even though there are no diplomatic relations and no real connections. It's probably not known, there are a few North Korean ships that are still landing in Japanese ports officially under the North Korean flag. These are cargo ships that actually are allowed to do still legal trade, but they are very few. The main connection point between the two countries was the Mamyongbyong ferry in Niigata, and that hasn't run for over a decade.
What about the building that houses the North Korean contingency here in the neighborhood?
Well, that's still...
That's closed down,
It's
right?
closed down, and Cheongdong is still trying to get access to that building, even though it's been auctioned off, and actually auctioned off 3 times, twice unsuccessfully to non-existent companies.
Right.
Who would have ever thought anything having to do with North Korea would involve fraud?
The representative director and his son were caught importing mushrooms, apparently. All sorts of things.
The Cheongdong is a wonderful organization that we don't really need to talk about very much, I hope. But nevertheless, it's still fighting for that. And we have, of course, the ongoing story here inside Japan of the North Korean school system, which is another thing that many people find it hard to believe, but that there is an entire school system here of Korean students who use North Korean textbooks, who have the pictures of
Our dear leader.
The dear leader and the dearly departed leaders
Right.
on the wall, and they sing the North Korean national anthem, and they have the North Korean flag flying. That this system teaches students in Korean and exists.
Who said Japan wasn't an open society?
It is an extremely open society that allows an enemy nation's school system to exist within its own.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that is another aspect to this whole story. But in terms of this defector landing, it brings to mind the fact that the Sea of Japan coast was the source of many of the kidnapped
Right.
Japanese that led to basically the political rise of our current prime minister.
Right.
The disappearance of these individuals and the Japanese government's insistence that these folks simply had either drowned or were suicides or simply ran away and got new identities, that there was an actual state-sponsored kidnapping of Japanese citizens was entirely denied by the Japanese government for decades. And the parents and the children of these people were fighting the Japanese government, and it was members of the LDP and other right-wing parties that glommed onto these people claiming that their relatives had been kidnapped. And one of them is the current prime minister. It's had real legs in terms of Japan's political system.
That's such an astounding story on both sides of it. I mean, not only that the Koreans, the North Koreans, had a policy of having submarines approach the territorial waters, people in rubber dinghies getting out, coming over, conking people on the head, putting them in sacks, taking them back out. I mean, that is just amazing in itself. This has been going on for a long time. But the other amazing part is that the foreign ministry was denying that was going on, and until actually their feet were inside the fire.
That's right. The government, particularly MOFA, completely blew it in terms of the 1980s and 1990s, denying that these kidnappees existed.
Well, wouldn't Dr. Snow love to get a piece of that?
Oh, I'm sure she would.
You know, in terms of diplomacy and public policy and you know, weaving that message. I mean, just the Japanese foreign ministry just looks horrible.
Well, it's not. It's the entire Japanese political elite. The kidnapped parents actually received, in one case, a postcard via Poland, of all places, from one of their children, and the Japanese government wouldn't accept it, so they passed it on to the Socialist Party, which had direct connections with the DPRK. The socialists told the DPRK, hey, we received this postcard via Poland from one of the persons who's supposedly in your country, but we know that person isn't there. That family, it was a young woman, her husband, and then their child, soon died under mysterious circumstances, we now know. So the socialists, who recently went into near oblivion in the elections, they have blood on their hands, according to these families. And so the entire political elite of Japan blew this issue. And one of the after effects is that we have these militant defenders of the families now in very high positions in the government because that turned out to be absolutely true.
Right. So all totaled, what is the calculated number of people who have disappeared under mysterious circumstances, possibly being kidnapped by the North Koreans?
Oh, it depends on who you ask. If you ask the Japanese government before the Abe administration came into power the second time, it's around 17 individuals. And that was the list that they went to with Prime Minister Koizumi to Pyongyang when he made his trip there for the first time, and then for the second time to pick actual persons up that had been kidnapped. Now they have this really amorphous list of about 200 individuals.
I would imagine it's got to be somewhere around 100. I mean, it's been going on for 20 years.
Yeah, it's been going on. But the thing is, it stopped, and these other disappearances are only tenuously possibly connected. The North Korean side, through back channel, says none of these people, we don't know anything about them. It's a great game, actually. How many persons were actually kidnapped? And let's face it, for the persons who have been the advocates of these abductee families, of the abducted persons, the more the merrier.
Yeah.
And they're never going to give up on even the most marginal case.
But what an uphill battle that must be. Not only is your loved one gone and you don't know where they are, but you suspect where they are, but your government is not really, endorsing your position or following up.
That was the case then. The government is fully bought into it now. It promotes movies about the missing. It has posters about them. It has days which it has special celebrations or commemorations. They're very much involved. It forces NHK, the national broadcaster, to talk about this issue more.
Mm-hmm.
That is a transformation that took place, and it's actually so natural to us, we hardly even remember. There was a time, in fact, when all of this was denied.
Just to wrap this episode up, there has been suggestions that North Korea is now preparing for its 5th nuclear test.
And if they do, it's part of the way that North Korea talks to the world.
Mm-hmm.
We forget that the Chinese in the 1960s did exactly the same thing, also in the 1950s. They would shell the islands of Quemoy and Matsu. That was not to really threaten world peace. That was to get the United States' attention.
Mm-hmm.
And for some regimes, setting off nuclear weapons is the way they say hello.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have my attention. By the way, happy birthday, Michael.
Oh, thank you.
Please stay tuned. We're going to continue to watch developments in North Korea and on Michael's birthday list.